Thank you all for being here this morning. It's great to have so many people join us today. It's clearly an issue that people feel strongly about, and it feels like it's a really opportune time to be discussing the role of food in women's prisons. I'm Victoria Williams. I'm the Director at Food Matters, and I'm going to be chairing today's session. A little bit of housekeeping. We are recording the session so that people that aren't able to join us today are able to hear it. And if you're not already, but I think you are automatically on mute. We are, so that's great. So we're going to just get started with that. So a little bit about Food Matters. I know that some of you have been in some of our webinars before, but for those that haven't, we are a charity that works on transforming food systems. And our work over 20 years has been about creating opportunities for change for a better food future for everybody through participatory approaches and community engagement with people and communities at the heart of all that we do. Our work covers a wide range of food-related issues and topics, but the impact of poor diet on health and mental well-being has been a consistent theme, particularly within the criminal justice system, which has been a central strand since 2012, when we ran 2 pilot programs, one at HMP Send and one at HMP Highdown. And my colleagues Helen and Freya are going to talk a little bit about that later. And last year we published Food Matters in Prison. It was a briefing paper about the role and impact of food in prisons. And the report explored the crucial role of food in shaping prisoners' identities and relationships, and its potential to have positive impacts in prisons. And we believe that harnessed correctly, it has the potential to be a driving force for more rehabilitative, safe and healthy prisons. And this is a third in a series of webinars exploring in more detail some of the key topics and issues in that report. And given the change in government and the renewed focus on the appropriateness of custodial sentencing for women, we believe the findings and recommendations of this report add weight to the growing arguments for a different approach to how we treat women in the criminal justice system. And we know that women in prison often experience difficult relationships with food that are available to them when they're in prison, leading to exacerbation of mental health issues and weight fluctuations. We also know that women experiencing mental health issues and trauma are disproportionately represented in prisons. And I expect you're all aware of the figures, but I just thought just to remind us that despite the strategic emphasis on imprisoning fewer women, in September 23, there were over 3,500 women in prison, and that was a 12% increase in the previous year. 31% of women in prison have experienced being in the care system, where it's 2% in the general population. 53% of women experienced abuse as a child, where it's 1 in 5 in the general population, and 49% of women reported suffering anxiety and depression, where it's 15% in the general population. And other statistics continue on that trajectory, including trauma, attempted suicide, levels of education and exclusion. And I took those figures from the Bromley briefings of 2024, but they're widely available. And in terms of government guidance on food, it's very limited. The catering meals for prisoners, PSI, the government buying standards have no specific reference to women's dietary requirements, such as difference in calorie intake, life stage requirements such as menopause or menstruation. There is reference in the mother and baby unit PSI around requiring more calories, but that's about it. And it seems like none of the most recent reviews, briefing papers or government plans for women make significant reference to food, nutrition or diet. And it will be interesting to see if the forthcoming HMP thematic review on women in prisons, which I think is due in February, mentions the role of food, diet and nutrition. However, the door is open to consider how to do things differently with the launch of the newly created Women's Justice Board. Its chair, Lord Chancellor and Justice Secretary Shabina Mahmood, said, "We need to do things differently. It's high time we found better solutions to help vulnerable women to turn their lives around." And much of the work being presented today is done with better solutions at their heart. And in this webinar, we will explore and consider the different meanings food has for women in prisons and ask what is the role for food in women's prisons and how do we make changes we need to our prison food system to support women through recovery and rehabilitation. And to do that, we're joined by speakers representing varying perspectives. and I'm delighted to welcome and thank them for their time and expertise in this area, and hopefully we'll have a really wide-ranging conversation after they've made their presentations. So each of the speakers is going to speak for about 25 minutes, and I'm going to ask you all to save your questions to the end, and if you can put your questions in the chat, and if they are directed specifically one of the speakers, please indicate that as well. And we will have one of our team to sort of try and collate and group the questions together so we can get through as many as possible. So our first presentation is from my colleagues in the Food Matters team delivering food and criminal justice. So we've got programme lead Helen Sandwell and Freya Harrap, nutritionist and workshop lead, and they're going to be speaking about how our practical solutions and food programmes deliver support to women to promote physical and mental well-being, to understand trauma and aid recovery, highlighting some of the outcomes. So please, over to you, Helen and Freya. And it will give you a 5-minute warning, just so we get through the presentations on time.
Okay, thanks, Victoria. I'm trying to take control. Chris. Not let me do it.
Have you clicked at the top?
I'm clicking on take control at the moment.
Oh. I'm not getting any kind of notification. So I can move stuff along if you want. Oh, you want your notes?
Yeah, sorry. If I just open it up myself so I can see my notes and then just tell you when to move it, is that okay?
Yeah, so do you want to share your screen?
I can share my, oh yeah, okay, I can share my screen.
I'll stop sharing now.
Oh. Can everyone see that?
Yeah.
Yeah, without my notes, hopefully, because that would.
No notes, sure.
Yeah, good.
Okay, so Freya and I, as Victoria said, we're both nutritionists working for Food Matters, and we're going to talk about some of the projects that we've been involved with, specifically with women in prison relating to physical and mental health. I'm going to start by talking about a project going way back to 2013 at HMP Send. And we just wanted to talk about this a bit today because we realised that we'd never actually discussed it in a public audience, probably because actually it was just quite a small project with a tiny bit of money, but we're quite proud of it because we did do it on so much money. So we'll just give you an overview of it today. Then Freya's going to talk about the work that we did starting in 2020 and is still ongoing at HMP Send. I just need to apologise. I've got 2 rescue cats going a bit crazy behind me. So if you hear any noise, that's what it is. And then I'm going to talk about some work that we undertook, the same project as Send, but it was during the period of COVID when we couldn't actually gain access to prisons. Okay, so the first project that we did in 2013, we called it the Fab Food and Wellbeing Programme, and it's something that we'd already been doing in the community. So we'd been working with groups in the community, including women with children at risk, people on drug treatment programmes, and people with drug treatment community orders, and those who'd come out of prison and were in probation hostels, and also hostels for homeless people. And we developed a programme, a toolkit and course that was based on telling people about healthy eating and getting them to think about their own food, to look after both their physical and their mental health. So topics that were included were eating for health, food, mood and cravings, planning and budgeting and understanding labels, and cooking. And for us, cooking was always very important. particularly with women, we found, and women who had children were particularly interested in the cooking aspect and the budgeting and shopping aspect. So, as I say, the toolkit's focus was on both physical and mental health. And we felt that they were so linked with food. There was such an interrelation between food, mental health, and physical health that it was really important to include both these things. So that just gives you an idea of what the toolkit looked like. We wrote it so that it could be used by us, and we could train staff within other organisations to use toolkit with their client groups. It had within it had handouts, but also lots of background information, participatory exercises, games, and recipes, because all our courses that we develop are very much participatory. And I think Freya's going to talk a bit more about that. It was also flexible so that it could be tweaked to different audiences. And what we did at Send and all our courses was to have an introductory session with people who'd be involved to find out what their interests were so that we could tweak our course to that audience. At Send, we ran a 6-week course, and it comprised 4 weeks of learning with, as I said, the participatory discussions, exercises and games. We always had healthy snacks for people to try each week, and they were really popular. And we had 2 cooking sessions at the end of the course. We ran the course within PIPE. If you don't know what PIPE is, it stands for the Psychologically Informed and Planned Environments. So they weren't actually treatment programs. They're not actually treatment programs. They are environments created in response for the need for specialised services with people with personality disorders, but women did not have to have a diagnosis of a personality disorder to be on PIPE. Within PIPE, the staff, so the prison officers, are specially trained to have increased psychological understanding of their work, and there are also psychologists on there. So within Send, all the women who were involved in PIPE were living on one closed corridor with the specialist staff there. We were able to evaluate the course in terms of how people's knowledge and their attitude towards healthy eating had changed over the course. We also wanted to evaluate how their food choices had changed, but unfortunately, as I said, this was a tiny grant we had, so we weren't able to do it within the scope of the project. But we did issue knowledge questionnaire and attitude questionnaires before the course, and then the same one at the end, and then again 6 weeks later. The graph that you can see here is showing changes in knowledge. So, oh God, it's really tiny. I think it's blue. The first column is before the course, and then directly after the course is the amber and green when we tested again 6 weeks later. And you can see that people did increase their knowledge over the course, and that knowledge was still increased, although with some it had dropped off a bit after 6 weeks. Unfortunately, we weren't able to have an external evaluation. We weren't able to do any actual statistical analysis with this one. Okay, we also had a look at attitude, and again, you can see that we were asking questions like, how easy do you believe it is to eat healthily within a prison environment? And people could say strongly agree down to strongly disagree. And then we scored those questionnaires. And you can see that people, again, their attitudes towards healthy eating increased positively over the course, dropped off slightly at 6 weeks, but still overall they did increase that perspective on the course. As I said, we couldn't analyse menu choices and canteen purchases, and a couple of difficulties we know that we would have had was that a lot of women had been allocated default menus. They hadn't made the choices themselves. And also Christmas occurred right in the middle. So people were buying a lot of chocolates as presents. So that would have also swayed the data. I'm just going to pass over to Freya now so that she can talk about the rest of the work we did at Send. And then I'm going to talk about what we did during COVID.
Great. Thank you, Helen. Hopefully everyone can hear me okay. Getting a nod from Chris, fab. So I'm going to talk us through a little bit about the development of the courses. And I think the more I speak through them, the clearer it will become how they've kind of developed from what Helen's been speaking about. But initially, courses were developed for a pilot in HMP Wandsworth, a men's prison. And from the courses, we generated a series of recommendations, which we've carried into our future courses. And you can see that our learning outcomes for the Feel Good Food Club, which is what the courses were called, are on screen. But broadly, it's focusing on how food can impact mental health, how that affects our food choices, and how those food choices in turn affect our mental health, as well as how food choices can affect behaviour and learning. We also look at the wider role of food, so beyond its nutritional value. So how is it important for strengthening identity, building self-esteem, building and maintaining relationships, and things like that. The original courses formed the backbone for the distance learning course, which Helen will speak on later, as well as the courses at HMP Send. The sessions were adjusted for the women's estate, and we have delivered courses with several different groups. So with incentivised substance-free living, which is run by the Forward Trust, for anyone that wants to live in a substance-free environment, and incentives may include access to a gym, kitchen, or priority family days. We also worked with the Democratic Therapeutic Community, which is a daily programme of group therapy and other activities, teaching more positive ways for women to manage their life. We, as Helen mentioned, we have worked with PIPE as well. PIPE is split into two different groups. So we've got the preparation and progression. And as Helen mentioned, it's not a kind of a treatment program in itself. It's there to support women as they move through treatment programs. So preparation will be preparing them. And then progression is once they've successfully completed those programs and they are kind of practicing and reiterating the kind of the skills that they've learned. We learn a lot about working with the prisons in order to ensure that our sessions were a priority for attendees. We used to, so with PIPE in particular, we used to separate out preparation and progression, but now we combine those groups, and we actually find that they create really supportive environments and kind of give space for women in order to kind of support others as well as learning from others. There's a benefit for us kind of working with groups that are already established and already know each other, just because in terms of like group cohesion, that can really help with some of the conversations that we're having as food can be quite a kind of a personal topic. So if we could have the next slide, please, Helen. So just some of the considerations that we would think about when we're delivering a course, but also when we're designing the course. So at the start, obviously, Victoria gave us some statistics about the experience of women who are in prison compared to, in particular, men. So we know that a trauma-informed approach is particularly important for the groups that we're working with. And this is something that has become more and more important as we've been delivering the courses. Similarly, with adapting resources and activities for neurodiversity, we know that there is a disproportionate representation of people with additional needs in prison compared to the community. So that is something, and that could look like adjusting resources to make them easier to read, adjusting activities so that they are reduced in sensitivity, and that could involve kind of taking a step out, taking a break when people need it, reducing lighting in the room, things like that, and then also providing things like fidget toys. We work with the women who need extra support to individualise their support, as we know that needs can be really varied and totally independent on the individual. And within this, substance misuse is included, and as this requires specific nutrition advice. Interestingly, the men's groups that were delivered, the group felt much more comfortable kind of sharing their experience and their needs around kind of food and substance misuse. And this informed the distance learning packs that were created that Helen will speak about. But this was kind of particularly relevant for some of the groups that I spoke about earlier, particularly kind of the incentivized substance-free living groups. We'll also consider personal circumstance. So everyone in the group has very different needs based on their skills, their knowledge, their living situation outside of prison. We know that women in prison often have a much shorter sentence, so the kind of living situation out of prison can be still quite relevant when we are running through those groups, whether it's kind of self-esteem, confidence, any kind of history of disordered eating. We also know that kind of family and children can be a particularly sensitive subject, so just kind of being aware of those, and just in general trying to make those sessions as inviting as possible, so avoiding that kind of lesson environment, providing hot drinks on arrival so that people can really kind of settle down into the session and it can feel like a kind of discussion and a learning experience on both sides. If we can have the next slide, please, Helen. Great. So this is just an example of some of the kind of outcomes from a session. So I appreciate that you might not be able to see everything that's written on the post-it notes on that kind of left-hand image, but it's basically just to show how the mood had changed through a session. So we often use post-it notes and flip chart paper with prompts to give feedback, and we use these as often the groups that we're working with have a negative association with things like form filling, and we want to avoid causing stress or anxiety in those sessions. So post-it notes can provide a really useful insights to help us gauge how a group might be feeling at the start of the session, as well as any kind of key learning points that have come up or emotions that have come up for people in a session. So as I said, in that left-hand image, we've done a mood meter. So at the start of the session, you can see that in that kind of bottom left-hand corner, the majority of the group weren't feeling great when they kind of sat down in the space that we were in. But by the end of the session, the majority of the group had moved into a much more kind of positive space. So kind of feeling good and brainy, feeling motivated, feeling good and feeling ready for the rest of the day. And then I've just highlighted a couple of extra kind of post-it notes with comments from the session, which I feel really kind of represent some of the other outcomes from the sessions, not just about kind of learning about nutrients and things like that. So last year we released a report following on from our round table, and our panel of experts, including those with lived experience, cited what they thought the role of food was within prisons. I'll name a few, and I would definitely encourage you to go and have a look at the report, because there's a whole kind of long list of them. But some of the ones that were mentioned were building relationships, promoting physical and mental well-being, creating a sense of agency, and boosting self-esteem. And I think particularly that one on the right, which was after we had cooked together and eaten together, there's a real kind of sense of that person feeling very proud of what they had created, and also a sense of that kind of working as a group, working in a community, which are really, really important with the kind of role of food in prison. And then if we could have the next slide, please, Helen. So this is just an example of our session outline. So we run all of our courses using a participatory approach, which means that we design the subjects in the course with the people who are attending, because they are obviously the experts in their own experience, and we want to make sure that what we're including is actually relevant to them and what they kind of want and need from the courses. So we'll always have an introduction session, we'll kind of go through some group guidelines to make sure that everyone feels really comfortable, and then we'll design that programme ourselves. We'll also always start with nutrition basics, just because there is a whole load of information out there that can be really, really confusing. So we'll kind of get everyone on the same level and do a bit of myth busting as well. The next two subjects there, so we've got food and mood and gut health. So those are probably our kind of most popular subjects that are chosen. Even if food and mood isn't chosen as a specific subject, it is something that will kind of be woven throughout the subjects that we cover. So, for example, in gut health, as those were kind of our main part of our main kind of learning objectives, and the kind of the research base around gut health has massively increased since the FAB toolkit, which Helen kind of ran through, which was developed in 2013. It's a really popular subject, so it's great that we can kind of give people lots of information on that. We also speak about food and identity. So how does food feed into identity? And we explore this with the group and kind of allow them to express that side of themselves, which perhaps they haven't really kind of explored before. And then, as Helen also mentioned, we'll always have a cooking session, because we know that that's something that not only is really important, but it's something that people really enjoy. So it's often our most kind of rowdy, but also most rewarding sessions. So kind of really focusing on commensality and kind of upskilling people with things like recipe adjustments, also with food, health and safety information. But I think, as we saw from that post-it note that was on the right-hand side, actually that kind of group work and coming together to create sometimes some, I mean, almost always some incredibly beautiful, big and delicious feasts is a really kind of big boost to people's mood and kind of self-efficacy. We will always make adjustments as well. So all of these sessions are designed to kind of stand alone, because we know that for various reasons people might not be able to attend, but we'll kind of stand alone, but also build on kind of previous knowledge from the session. So our cooking sessions will relate back to what we might have spoken about in our food and mood session, for example. We had one woman who, just as an example in terms of like adjustments, who wasn't very confident around knives. So we worked together to ensure that she could work on her own, kind of in a separate part of the kitchen, because that was what she felt most comfortable doing. And we kind of chose our ingredients from the spares that we had, and she came up with a dish, and we ended up having some really delicious berry pancakes as a dessert, as an addition, which was totally unplanned, but just an example of how we can kind of be flexible with that. And then if we could have the next slide, please, Helen.
2 minutes, Freya.
2 minutes. Okay, I will speed through these next slides. But this is so just an example of the cooking session, but also just an example of some of the behaviour change that we support women with. So a key part of the course is supporting women to make changes where they are now. So this was mapping barriers and solutions to help them implement some of the changes of some of the things that we'd learned in the session, but we might use other tools such as habit stacking or routine planning. Can I have next slide, please? And then next slide. So some of the other work that we do is working with women on probation. So we worked with Woking Women's Centre, and these sessions are particularly important at the moment as the government is moving towards more community sentencing for women. So our courses are adjusted for that change in environment, but generally we are kind of focusing on empowering people and kind of pulling out those tools that they already have. We know that over half of female prisoners are mothers, and a lot of the women that we worked with in the Women's Centre were mothers, and they were using this course to show that they were creating a safe and stable environment. There was one particular woman who kind of took great pleasure in taking the food to her son who is in care, showing him kind of what ingredients were good for him and why. And the group really came together to support her doing that. She had a history of disordered eating, so they would come to her and kind of cook and eat with her to support her through that. So it was really powerful to kind of see that change. And then next slide, which is my final slide. So something else that we've offered at the Train the Trainer at Woking Women's Centre, having worked with the women that they support, we felt that we understood the needs and the challenges of the women using the centre, but also the women supporting them. So we held a training session to kind of really embed food as part of the culture there, with counsellors, admin team, managerial team, to name a few. So it was a whole team approach to support women through food. We know that the women working there kind of work long hours with high emotional investment, and so we really wanted to support them, and we gave them lots of tools to not only practice on themselves, but to support the women that they worked with. And now I will pass back over to Helen to talk us through the next bit.
Thanks, Freya. So I'm just going to take a step backwards to before we did our second courses at SEND. We got a grant from the Ministry of Justice for, it was the Innovations Grant for doing these courses. But the week before we were due to start, the country went into lockdown, so we were unable to enter prisons. So we didn't know how long, no one knew how long it would be before we could go back into prisons. So we were asked to come up with a plan B. And that plan B, we decided that we would convert our face-to-face courses into a distance learning course. So we decided to call it something that everyone could feel involved with. So we called it the Feel Good Food Club. And we did it initially just for SEND, but then we promoted it in all the other women's prisons, and it was very popular at that time. Like the course, the face-to-face courses, the emphasis of the Feel Good Food Club is on mental health and well-being, as well as physical health. We encourage within it for women to feel empowered, that they have some control over their choices. So, for example, we talk about how women can bring about change, getting things added to the canteen list, so that's the prison shop, or talking to and making recommendations to people in the kitchens if there's particular food that they like. And within the Feel Good Food Club, we also use real life examples that we had heard about of women in prison making positive lifestyle changes. Each module included a section of learning, a section of reinforcement and reflection. So again, there were exercises for people to do, but of course they'd be doing them by themselves in their room. And that the course is actually being converted to digital format this year, and we are going to pilot that this year. Just to show you what the 6 modules were, so we put a bigger focus, I think, on mental health than we'd ever done before because of the situation, COVID, and people were much more at risk of having mental health issues. So after we covered the basics of healthy eating, we had three modules really on mental health, one of them being a focus on substance misuse. And here, as Freya said, we found in a group environment, women certainly were unwilling to talk about substance misuse, but we thought that it would be useful to have that information so that when they were by themselves, they could read up on that information. And then we had a section generally on self-care. So as well as just looking at food, we looked at all aspects of self-care, again, because during COVID, we felt that was particularly important. So we talked about exercise, about mindfulness, things like that. And then the final module was a celebration of what they'd achieved and talking about what they were planning as their next steps.
3 minutes, Helen.
Okay, thanks. We wanted it to be really colourful and eye-catching and appealing, so that's just an example of a couple of pages. So we really wanted the design to be important. So we had 500 women were recruited over a year from all 12 prisons. We've maintained contact with a group of them through email a prisoner. We couldn't maintain contact with all 500 that way, it would just cost too much. But we did track a group of women, some from each prison, through the course and got feedback from them. And actually, the situation as it was we were writing the course month by month and sending that module out as we'd written it. So it meant that this feedback could feed directly into the course. And then we got a lot of feedback from people through the emails, and this is just one woman saying, I've been eating much healthier and cutting out all the crap like biscuits, cakes and crisps. I'm choosing healthy options on my dinner and lunch menus as much as I can. I attend the gym 4 times a week and I've been doing this for 12 weeks. I feel mentally and physically better. I've lost 7 pounds and I'm very proud of myself. And that's the most important. The last line, I'm very proud of myself, because people, poor diet can affect people's self-esteem. Our focus wasn't on weight loss, but we found that people were losing weight just by eating less processed food and making healthier choices. We also, during COVID, we started a newsletter called Her Wellbeing. Again, it was just, the focus was not just on food, it was on all aspects of health and well-being and lifestyle change that were possible within the prison environment. We continued our theme of empowerment, and we've had 27 issues to date since COVID. It's still really popular. So we send it out in paper format, and you can see here just a couple of pages. Again, we wanted the design to be really colourful, really eye-catching and appealing. So you can see here we had one focus on PMDD, so particularly issues of interest to women, premenstrual dysphoric disorder. We also had one issue on the menopause, because somebody wrote to us from a prison asking if we would do that. We had lots of recipes, all based on food from the canteen, either no cook or things that could be cooked in an air fryer or a microwave, because we know that some prisons have that. This just shows a reader survey we did. It's a bit difficult to read, but just to say that the blue and the red were the positive responses. So you can see the majority were positive responses. And again, there's some more questions. And again, the blue and the blue and the red were positive responses.
1 minute, Helen.
So you can see that there. As I said, we went on to, like the Feel Good Food Club, we have digitised Her Wellbeing, and these are some stats from Launchpads, which are available in Newhall and Style. And we can see that more and more people are starting to find it online and read it online. We also do Her Wellbeing in the community. So we do another version that's available as an e-newsletter for community groups. So if any of you want to sign up for it, if you have a group of women who might be interested in reading this, if you sign up, and then you can pass it on to them and encourage them to sign up as well. And the link is there on that page. And Freya sends out the community copies, so she can tell you more about it if you want to get in touch with her. Okay,
thank you, Helen.
It.
Covering a huge amount, both of you, in a short amount of time. All of these resources will be available. We will be sending out the presentations and any links afterwards. So don't worry about if you didn't catch that. As Helen said, a lot of the resources are based on real life examples and experiences. And now we're going to hear from Maria Adams and Erin Powers. Maria is Associate Professor in Criminology at the University of Surrey and Project Lead on Doing Porridge, a project to understand and document women's experiences of food in prison. Erin is a researcher and practitioner with interests and experience in prisons, prison theatre and gender and incarceration. And they are going to talk about the Doing Porridge project. Just to say, Erin was a postdoctoral research fellow with the project before joining Liverpool John Moores as a lecturer in criminology. So thank you so much, Maria and Erin. Take it away.
Well, thank you so much for inviting us. We really appreciate it and was very much looking forward to this seminar. So this presentation is going to focus on the aspect about the project that we've been doing on the role of food in women's prisons. And it's titled kind of Understanding Food in Women's Prisons in Relation to Social Identities. So we are really kind of looking at the relationship between gender and race. So not only looking at kind of women's needs, but most importantly, looking at kind of minoritized women in prison and the role of food. Can I? Oh, perfect. Thank you very much. So just to kind of the wider project aims, we started off in 2021 wanting to look at food from a kind of social, or sociological and criminological perspective. And there were some real core aims that we wanted to understand. So, for example, food and social identities, exploring the kind of varied of spaces within the prison and how food is consumed. Looking at opportunities where women were able to kind of demonstrate agency, and that included choices and practices. That also included looking at some of the kind of challenges that women faced as well, understanding the kind of discontent and dissent amongst women. And then most importantly, we are at the point of identifying and working on kind of policy and practical changes when it comes to food. So for this particular presentation, we are just focusing on the kind of first aim, understanding where are we when it comes to the kind of intersection of kind of food and social identities. Next slide. Thank you. So just to give you a bit of a backdrop, this was a 2-year study. I say 2-year study, it turned into like a 4-year study, exploring the way women perceive food and their perceptions in terms of their experiences, but also their emotions around food as well. And we wanted to kind of draw, looking at, using kind of life narratives when it came to understanding food prior to when women went into prison and during incarceration as well. So this was funded by the Economic Social Research Council, and we deployed a kind of qualitative approaches, including observations, focus groups, interviews, art workshops, and diaries. In total, we did work with 108 women, but from those 108 women, we interviewed 80 women from 4 prisons, excuse me. And within the 80 women, we interviewed 20 per prison. We also interviewed 12 staff members as well, in which we do have a paper coming out about the perceptions of food from staff members, from prison officers to governors, to other aspects of kind of working in the prison. And for this presentation, like I said, we'll be looking at the experiences of those of women that identify from minority backgrounds. So our sample included 63% of women who identified as white and 30% of women who identified from a minoritized background. And minority women comprised of those that identified as Black African, Caribbean, South Asian, mixed race, and including Eastern European as well as Roma Gypsies as well. 6% did not disclose their ethnic identity. Just change the slide, thank you. So as I mentioned, we will be really drawing on the kind of first aim, and we wanted to kind of really look at the intersection of gender, race, but still obviously acknowledge that there are other social characteristics that do make up women's experiences. So whilst this conversation is very prominent around gender and race, there are other areas such as age and neurodivergent issues and family environment that do make up the kind of whole experience when it comes to women imprisonment. And then for this particular presentation, we were looking at kind of the way social identities can influence the perception of food before they enter the prison, the way identities are experienced via the lens of the prison menu, and lastly, how prisons kind of mark forms of diversity and how women can promote forms of social change via informal practices of cooking. In which we kind of categorize this as kind of an informal form of kind of justice. And then we'll kind of identify a few kind of policy and practical changes within the kind of marker of social identities. So just to kind of firstly start off, in prison, food does provide a real platform to understand in depth kind of prison life overall. And a lot of the kind of conversations is very much about, when it comes to minority women, how does food play a part with the kind of everyday routine of prison, and how do prisons respond to these groups? So we're really kind of touching upon, women's perceptions in terms of the values of food, but also how that value is responded when it comes to the prison system. So before Erin starts with the kind of findings and what we identified when it comes to social identities, this just gives a bit of backdrop in terms of when we're looking at minority women affected by the criminal justice system, and mostly for the prison service, there has been a lot of conversations, both from a practical and policy side, but also from academic scholarship. So Hibiscus kind of identified that, minority women are experiencing a form of double disadvantage, and when it comes to being affected by the criminal justice system. And what that essentially means is that inequalities are often multiple, and it stems from things like racism, discrimination, and then it's connected also with, gendered needs as well as social economic challenges as well. And then we can also really extend this understanding around racial and gendered inequalities with concepts like cultural shaming, in which various forms of shame intersect with ethnic identity, as this has been refound in kind of research understanding of prisoners' families. So authors such as Abbas and myself and my colleague Daniel McCarthy really looked at kind of the views of minority families who had a person affected by incarceration. So if we take this concept around kind of culture shaming, it is really also intertwined with things that Helen has really picked up on around trauma, histories of abuse and addiction. And much of the scholarship, as many of you guys know, has argued that women in prison are, the most oppressed and misunderstood. And this is even more so for minority women. So we, identified that, for example, with reports around the kind of death of baby Aisha Clearly at Bronzefield, which reported, clear systematic failings and its ability to kind of meet the needs of Black women in prison. So then this proposes the question, well, how do we look at the experiences of minority women when it comes to the lens of food? So I'm going to pass over to Erin to be speaking in more depth about these kind of three themes that I've previously discussed. Turn over now.
Thanks, Freya. So I'm just going to present just a little bit on what the women that we spoke to said about these issues. And I think one of the things throughout our research that was really important was what women's relationships with food were like before they came into prison. And I think Helen and Freya touched on that a little bit. But for women, for minoritized women, lots of them, particularly those who felt particularly sorry, I'm very naughty. I don't know if you can. But for minoritized women who felt particularly connected with their culture, they spoke a lot about the food that they ate before they came into prison, very, very warmly about it on the whole. And for those women particularly, when they were in prison, they experienced the food in terms of quality, in terms of choice, in terms of the control that they had over what they ate, as particularly distressing, and they felt particularly unhappy with it because of their relationship with food prior to prison. So next slide, please, if that's okay. So broadly, these women felt that the menus offered by the prison didn't reflect their identities, reflect their cultures. This manifests in terms of the options just not being there. So Faith talks about how, traveller food wasn't represented, there wasn't Spanish food. We had, women from Scotland, women from some African countries who felt like what they ate wasn't represented. But it also manifested in terms of people feeling like their identities weren't taken into consideration when adaptations were made, when they were offered choices, and this was particularly true when they had intersecting identities. So the example we've got here is a woman who is halal and vegan, and she really struggled to have both of those food needs met. And it wasn't just the case in her situation. Maria touched on, people who were neurodivergent, particularly minoritized women who were neurodivergent, really struggled to get their foods met because they might have sensory issues around food. There was also women who'd experienced trauma, who had particular needs around food and relationships with food, and these needs weren't met, and they particularly weren't met if they had other intersecting identities. So next slide, please. While kind of cultural diversity was not present on the prison menu, most women felt at all, really. It was marked through different celebrations within the prisons. Black History Month was the one celebration that was marked in all the prisons we were in, and that manifested in multiple ways. For some people, it was in some prisons it was kind of one special meal. In other prisons, there was options for food from African and Caribbean backgrounds available every day on the menus for a month. There were some really positive examples of this that I'll talk about shortly, but lots of women felt that it was quite tokenistic. Some women felt frustrated that actually, if you can offer this food for a month, or if you can offer this food for a day or a week, why can't you offer it all the time? If you're showing that you know how to do it and you can, why is my identity only confined to this month? For other women, they felt that actually their identity was being flattened out, so there wasn't much nuance drawn between different Black identities, between Caribbean food, between African food. The most common food that was offered in Black History Month was jerk chicken and rice and peas, which didn't represent everyone's heritage. So those were some of the frustrations that came with these kind of marking of diversity. And then if you go on to the next slide for us, thank you. And another was that actually not all celebrations were marked. So this left women who maybe didn't feel included or represented by Black History Month feeling quite unseen. I've just seen a question pop up that said, who is cooking the food? And I'll kind of touch on that in a minute. But broadly, there is a catering manager who creates the menus. There is some prison staff who are catering staff who are in there, and then the women do a lot of the cooking. So they work in kitchens and they do a lot of the cooking. And that actually was quite interesting in terms of this sort of food, because for some women, as I'll go on to talk about, particularly during Black History Month, Black women got to input into those menus and choose and teach women some of their food that they made. In others, they didn't, and actually a lot of the Black women felt like this isn't, like, I don't recognize this food. It was potentially, written by a catering manager who doesn't have much experience with this sort of food. It was made by women who don't have much experience with this sort of food, and it doesn't represent me at all. So that's a really interesting thing that came up. And I know we're answering questions at the end, but I did just think that was probably a bit of useful context. So yeah, these are examples of celebrations that maybe weren't marked or were celebrations in some prisons or in other prisons. I know I mentioned a Scottish woman earlier who very much felt like they mark a lot of celebrations, but she'd been in prison for a long time in multiple prisons, and she'd never seen Burns Night marked. So there's a lot of different kind of identities that people maybe didn't feel were recognised. So we go on to the next slide, please. So this is an example of a Black History Month celebration that was spoken about really positively. And this is a woman basically explaining that her and a group of women she knew in the prison, all of whom were Black, went to the governor and said, can we do something? The governor left it up to them to choose what they did. And they were able to kind of bring lots of women in communally to cook. Some of the food needed to be prepared overnight, so they were allowed to stay at their cells longer. They worked very communally, they worked very collectively, and then when the food was served, the governor also brought a steel band in. So it became a real celebration, and these kind of flexibilities were talked about in other ways as well. So during Ramadan, women were allowed to, and in one prison, Ramadan's celebrated very differently in many other places, but the women who were fasting were allowed to come out their cells and cook for sundown, so that they weren't eating food that had been, you know, prepared and served at 4 p.m. hours and hours later. And that was really meaningful for them. And again, they got to work communally, collectively, at a different time to everyone else in a different space. And that felt really important and meaningful. Another example of Black History Month being marked in a way that people experienced as meaningful was when a group of women were allowed to input into the menus. So they had a choice. Generally, you'll get about 5 choices a day on a prison menu, and each day of Black History Month there was a choice from a Caribbean or African culture, and the women got to design those themselves and came into the kitchen to cook them themselves. And for one woman in particular, she was able to share a recipe of her grandma's who'd passed the previous week, and you know, the women had been very supportive, and the catering manager had been very supportive and said, of course you don't have to cook this. But actually for her, you know, she wasn't able to make her grandma's funeral, but she was able to share her grandma's recipe and a bit of her grandma's memory, and for her that was a really special and meaningful way of marking, you know, a loss and of marking her grandma's life. So there was really meaningful ways of celebrating these social identities that we found, and for the women who experienced that, they were experienced as a form of justice. They made the prisons feel like a more communal and a more fair and a more democratic space, and it was very, very important in terms of kind of their overall prison experience, the role that food had played in that. So if you go on to the next slide for me, please. So as well as being able to share their culture through food, women were also felt that they were able to embody their culture through food. So in the examples that you can see here, Adora's goes on to talk about how serving people is a really important part of, you know, where she's from, of her family, of their values. And again, Carisha kind of says the same thing when she's talking about sharing food. And it's really being given the opportunity to do that was incredibly meaningful in terms of kind of being able to enact the values of their culture. And in the examples that I've given on the last 2 slides, these are all experiences that were kind of done formally within the prison, but there was lots and lots of examples of women doing this informally as well. So women cooking collectively on their wings, sharing food, getting food off canteens. So that's the kind of the prison shop. It's not a physical space, it's a place where you order food. You can get things like spices, condiments, really depends on what is on the list, and actually that was something that was a bit of an issue in terms of women would move from prison to prison, and in the prisons that tended to be a bit closer to London, they tended to be able to get more on those canteen lists that met their cultural needs, whereas in prisons that were a bit further out, we found that the canteen lists tended to be a little bit more limited in what they would offer and what women could buy, that might be able to allow them to, you know, cook individually or cook collectively and meet those cultural needs. So I'm just
sorry,
Fab, I'm about to go on to the last slide, so that is perfect. Okay, so what can this mean? So the women spoke about how the prison constrained their ability to be able to embrace some of their identities, and this could be in a lack of provision, so not having the options to do it, but also a lack of acknowledgement of certain cultures and the nuances of certain cultures. As we saw on the slide earlier, you know, one woman who couldn't get her kind of halal needs met and her vegan needs met said, I felt like no one was listening to me. Women who couldn't get these needs met felt really unheard and unseen, and this was experienced by some people as another form of punishment, an additional layer to the punishment that they were already experiencing by being in prison. So as I mentioned, women have found ways to navigate this. They've bought food off canteen, they've cooked collectively. You know, in the last couple of slides we saw they went to the governor and they asked about being able to create spaces to express their cultural identities. There are a lot of limitations to this, both in terms of what they can access to cook, which in lots of spaces is very, very limited. It might be a microwave, that might be it, but also in terms of purchasing food on canteen, because this is really dependent on either getting money sent in from your family or working in a job that is relatively well paid within the prison. So this exacerbates some of the other inequalities and the intersectionalities that people might have experienced pre-prison. So it's not a reliable way to resist this kind of secondary punishment. We really found that there was an opportunity, and hopefully we've demonstrated that in the last couple of slides. There's an opportunity for the prisons to facilitate food as a very meaningful vehicle to recognise and celebrate diversity, and particularly what a lot of the women talked about is this kind of building of culture and building of community, which one woman talked about as a sense of sisterhood. So it felt really, really important to the women both to be able to share their culture with people who didn't know about it, but also be around people who did understand it and cook with them and for them. So while some of these, you know, initiatives were really positive, a lot of them were experienced as very tokenistic and essentially, you know, there to tick the diversity box to say that they'd done it, without giving much thought or asking for much input from the women. And again, this kind of compounded this feeling of being unheard, not being listened to, not being seen, and particularly in relation to some of their social identities just not being acknowledged, recognised or understood. So what we found did work well was when minoritised women were able to give a lot of input around these celebrations and the menus, when they were able to take some sort of ownership over it and they were asked for their opinions in meaningful ways rather than kind of a survey that they felt was then ignored. They would like more constant provision of this food. They'd like to be able to access this year round, really. As one woman in our study said, Black History Month's great, but I'm Black 12 months of the year. So they'd like that kind of consistency and just more opportunities than these siloed events to celebrate their culture, to share their culture, to teach other people about it, and to be given the space to do that with other women if possible. So that is us. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. That was just so interesting, and so many of you, the findings and the information that you gathered is very similar to the kind of feedback we've had during our courses. So our next speaker is Jamie Dabbs, who has 22 years experience in HMP service, all but 3 months spent in the female estate. And he's been the catering manager at Drake Hall since 2013. With a catering background in fine dining restaurants, over the years, Jamie has transferred his passion to the more industrial side of catering. And he's going to talk about his experiences of passing on his knowledge and skills and creating a working ethos of a professional kitchen in a prison environment. So thank you, Jamie, and please do take it away.
Morning. So welcome to HMP Drake Hall. Just looking at the last few slides there, I can only sort of tell you what we do here. I can't speak for the whole prison estate, but I'll try and give you a little glimpse behind the fence. So hopefully I've got control of these now and we should move on. So they always say to get a successful prison, you need to get 3 things right. Why is that not working, Chris?
It should do. You've got control of the. Try clicking again, or a space bar.
No.
Oh, it's me. Okay, let me see. Can request it. It's showing up on my. So is that showing up now?
Yeah, we're getting that. Okay, so yeah, you need to get 3 things right in a prison: post, visits, and the food. So quite difficult to get them all right, but very easy to get them all wrong. And if we do get any of those wrong, then there is very real world consequences to them, particularly financial. As an example, I had a look earlier. The Strangeways riots back in the 90s caused £144 million worth of damage. So it's quite emotive. I think you're going to have to move these on, Chris. It's not letting me do it. So just give you a little bit of background about HMP Drake Hall then. So back in the day during the war, we used to house the munition workers. So all around this area where we're based was munitions and armament complex. Then the MOJ bought it off the MOD and turned it into a male open prison in the 60s. And then from 1974, it was turned into a female prison. From 2002, they put up an external fence and we were moved from open to semi-open. And then back in 2009, after another reshuffle in the estate, we became a closed prison. So we've got an operational capacity of 340 beds. So that's 315 women sitting under closed conditions inside the fence. And then we've got a further unit outside of the fence line, which has another 25 beds in it. And these are for open status prisoners, and they would go out to work in the community under licence, which we'll talk about in a bit. So we accommodate women from all over the country, ages 18 upwards. So challenges that I've sort of highlighted here that we come across within the kitchens in a prison setting. So we've got increased health problems through the abuse of drink and drugs. So these can manifest themselves as mental as well as physical. Past traumas, such as abuse, can manifest itself around food, eating disorders, phobias. An example, I've got a lady in the past that would have a mental and physical and an emotional reaction just to the smell or the sight of Marmite, and that was all based on past traumas. We've got issues around lack of mobility and access to exercise due to the regime, which can increase health issues and weight gain. These are also exacerbated by an ageing population. This is evident in the prison setting as well as in normal society. And then female specific issues, we've got the increased calorie intake around pregnancy. We ourselves here haven't got a mother and baby unit, but other prisons do. And then again, looking at the ageing population, we've got increased nutritional intake for menopause as well. So a little look at what we do in the kitchen. And so on the right there is an example of one of our daily menus. So every day we will offer breakfast, lunch, dinner and supper. So breakfast tends to be a pre-packed cereal, milk, toast, jam, condiments like that. We will offer a snack lunch and a hot tea meal. We will run, each service will have 5 options as a minimum, and then we will run that about a 28-day cycle, and that cycle is refreshed every 4 months to try and keep the menus a little bit more seasonal. So there's quite a bit of change throughout the year. Within that menu, every day we will try and cover all your ethnic minority, all your ethnic backgrounds. So whether it's black, Asian, white, we will try and cover all your religious diets. We will try and cover all your lifestyle diets and medical diets. So we're talking vegan, gluten-free, Muslim, Hindu, Buddhist. There's a lot to try and encompass in essentially 5 choices. Obviously, everything on there has to comply with current Food Safety Agency and the National Health Service guidance. So it's the Eat Well plate, which is what everything's based on, which is the current guidance we have. We do all that on a budget of £3 and a penny. If you just want to press the next button, Chris. So we do that on £3 and a penny. So that is to get all 4 dishes out. So as a comparator, the last time I looked, the NHS was spending £4.56 on 1 meal, and we're getting all of those out on £3 and a penny. So it's quite a tight budget. And on top of that, as has been discussed in previous slides, we will try and cover all the major religious festivals and celebrations throughout the year. So a little closer look at the menus then. So the idea behind the menus is everyone should be able to make an informed choice for what they want. So each menu has got a description of what the dish contains. Each menu will identify the healthier options of those choices. We'll highlight any calorific guidance on there. We'll highlight which dishes are suitable for halal and vegan diets. We'll identify any of the top 14 allergens, and we will put pictorial image on there to aid any sort of non-English speakers or those with poor literacy. So that will highlight the sort of the main protein item of the dish. Also, the menus are written in neurodiverse fonts. So inside the kitchen then, we have around 15 of the women. They do the majority of the cooking under the supervision of myself and my team. Obviously, we have to adhere to all food safety regulations, allergen regulations, labelling regulations. So off the back of that, they will be offered MVQs through our service provider, so they can get to a level 3 in catering and hospitality, a level 2 in food safety qualifications, but also they'll learn soft skills with us, such as timekeeping, team working. They'll learn basic culinary skills. We also try and embed maths and English throughout the day in everything they do. Food wise, we try and incorporate fresh veg where we can. So fresh veg is often on the menus. Obviously, there is a financial implication of that. It's slightly more expensive. So where we can't get that in, we'll use frozen veg, which these days is very, very close nutritional wise to frozen in the processors that they use now. We'll try and increase the use of pulses, beans, lentils to boost the nutritional content of any dishes we've put on there. We'll use bulgur wheat and couscous as alternatives to rice and potatoes. Everything we do is cooked fresh on the day. Where possible, we will batch cook to try and keep things as healthier as possible. And we'll also use a healthier cooking method. So things will be steamed, things will be baked rather than fried. And the majority of our dishes, I would say 80 to 85%, are all home cooked. So outside of the kitchen then, on the actual units where the women live, they've got kitchenettes. So in there, they've got ovens, microwaves, air fryers. So off the back of that, we offer a weekly graze box. So this is non-perishable goods such as pastas, rice, lentils, oats, and store cupboard vegetables, potatoes, onions, carrots. The idea behind this is to encourage communal cooking, and is to complement what they can get off us, off the menu itself, and what they can get off their canteen. So an example around this would be, we quite often have, if there's chicken leg on the menu, we'll quite often get a lot of ladies order the chicken leg. They won't particularly want it on with potatoes and veg on the menu. They'll come get their chicken leg, take it back to the unit because somebody has cooked a big curry, and they'll all contribute their chicken to that curry. So encourages communal cooking, as we've seen on other slides. That is a major thing for a lot of communities. It also encourages self-catering, which is something that we do encourage as well. We also introduced a meat-free Monday. So this was, we signed up to Stella and Paul McCartney's charity. So the thinking behind this was sort of an educational push to try and get the ladies into the habit of having one meat-free day a week, which was sort of current thinking around sustainability. And the idea behind this was, if they got into the habit of doing that whilst in custody, it might be something that they continued on release. They potentially then could get their children into it, and then it's sort of the dynamics of push for a bit of a social change. On site, we've also got a CAF. So this is run in conjunction with Costa Coffee through our education provider. So they get employment and training opportunities through that with full Costa Coffee qualifications. And then, as I mentioned earlier on, we've got an open unit, which is outside the fence, which is housed with open unit prisoners who go out on licence into the community, and they're all self-catering. So we ensure that they have got a stacked larder of all the basic goods, and they will cook either for themselves or, again, communally as a household. So final thoughts for me then, it was a whistle-stop tour, but I do believe, as has been spoken about for the last hour or so, that education is fundamental to the success of catering in a prison. The women need to have the ability to make informed choices about the food they order. And I think they should have access to that information. So, for instance, if they've got information on dietary and medical needs, they can choose off the menus to meet those needs. So, for instance, pre-diabetics, if they have the knowledge that they need to cut down a little bit more on the carb, take a bit more veg, salad, etc., they can manage that themselves. But unless they've got that advice and guidance, they wouldn't know. They also should have the guidance on what basic intake the body needs and how that changes with age, with menopause, with illness. What does a healthy diet look like? So we spoke about the Eat Well plate. That is unfortunately the current guidance, but it doesn't fit everybody. So it's understanding the body's needs. And then there should be support out there for making those choices, whether that's through myself in catering department, whether through our healthcare provider, we have healthcare champions, through our wellbeing centre, through our education providers, or through third-party literature such as yourselves. So that's very much it from me. So thanks for listening. I'm sure there'll be some questions coming my way.
Thank you so much, Jamie. That was a whistle-stop tour. Yeah, really appreciate it. I'm going to take Chair's prerogative and just ask you a quick question in terms of what kind of sort of ongoing dialogue and conversation do you have from the kitchen point of view with the healthcare provider in your prison? Because it often seems to me that, you know, so many of those services that are outsourced, like healthcare, there's not necessarily as much ongoing conversations that need to happen, because, as you say, you know, if people understand better about their health condition, they can make more informed choices. So I wondered, from your point of view, how much dialogue or kind of communications you have with the healthcare provider in your prison.
Yeah, we have quite a close relationship with the healthcare here. We've had a single point of contact appointed just through to look at dietary needs. So if the women have a specific need, they can go through that single point of contact via the healthcare, and then they can advise us what's needed. or they can signpost them out to some of their health champions, and they will offer advice and guidance to what they need to be looking for on the menus.
Okay, that's great. One other question before I, I'm just wondering, I think you've kind of said it really, education, but I wonder in terms of what my experience or our experience of being in different prisons is that sometimes a job in the kitchen is seen as a really good job and an enjoyable job, and in quite a few prisons it's not seen as a good job at all and not enjoyable. I just wondered, from your point of view, what do you think is the key ingredient to people seeing it as a good job and enjoying it?
Bottom line, money. It's usually considered one of the higher paying jobs in a prison, just because of the nature of the work. But okay. I myself, I mean, we're a pretty level playing field pay wise here, but I just try and make it a working environment rather than a prison environment. So I will class the women as my workforce, and that respect is given back to us, and we get on well, and I find that they tend to respect that and embrace it.
Okay, that's interesting. I guess my experiences of where where people get the opportunity to cook from scratch is a really positive one, rather than sometimes just opening cardboard boxes. But I just wondered if that's something.
Definitely. Oh yeah, definitely. Well, we're lucky. We're actually one of the only prisons left that are still centrally served. So we will have the women cooking the food, and then they will serve it to their peers. So there's an element of pride there when they're.
Oh, okay, directly. Okay,
yeah.
That's really interesting. Okay, I don't want to hog the floor. There are questions coming in. I am just having a few problems with my internet, so I'm not sure I'm getting all the questions. So I'm going to defer to my colleagues that are going to hopefully ask me. But just wanted to say, just before we start with questions, along with I'm sure other people are on the call today, I'm going to be attending the Justice in Women and a New Direction conference tomorrow that's being put on by the Weavers Company in Clinks. And I just wondered if there's anything that anyone on the call specifically thinks that should be talked about, or issues that I should be raising at that conference tomorrow. Please put those in the question and answer as well. So can we start off with some questions? Sorry, I'm just struggling slightly with this, with my internet. There is a question to Jamie, particularly about the halal and vegan that Erin and Maria talked about, that, and Helen is asking about, that she understood that all vegan food can be eaten by people following a halal diet. Isn't that why the vegan choice is usually the default choice, because everyone can eat it? That's not to say that vegan dishes would necessarily represent cultural preferences.
Your default choice would normally be a vegetarian dish, yeah, just to try and encapsulate as many as possible. We here would normally make it a vegetarian dish, and then vegan would be done separate. But yes, you're right, all vegetarian dishes suitable for halal diet. Okay,
great. We've got a question that comes under big ideas, but I'm not sure who it's to directly, whether it's up to Maria or to Jamie. Were the prison regimes open to making changes to the way they did things in response to your findings? Is that, I mean, I guess that's that could be to Helen and Freya and to Maria and Erin. Do either of you, any of you, want to come in on that?
This is the second part. It's from Emily at Big Ideas. Okay. So
over to you, Chris.
So first, it says, do the prisons have much agency to change the ingredients food they order in for cooking from the centralized catering company? And then that's followed up with, were the prison regimes open to making change to the way they did things in response to your findings? So I'm guessing that's to Erin and Maria as well. But the first bit might be to Jamie.
So we've got obviously central supplier. We have a certain amount of lines that we can choose from. We undergo something called cap testing throughout the year, where we'll test products, bring new products in. So they'll go via a scrutiny panel. I mean, I know Al Christie's on this call. He's more at home to answer these questions than myself, because it's more his world. But yes, we have a pot that we can choose from of ingredients, and then we will create our menus from what's available.
Al, did you want to come in on that at all?
I'll just have to open up the.
Oh, okay.
I'll just try and find. There we go. There you go. I've
Hello,
enabled.
can you hear me?
There you go.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, thanks for that, Jamie.
No problem.
Yeah, so we have approximately 1,100 food items on our catalogue, plus catering managers can put in non-catalogue requests. So if they want a particular food item, either for a festival or for staff restaurants, etc., they can put in a request to order a product that's not on the catalogue. The catalogue is reviewed monthly. We look at that according to volume purchased, and also factor in complaints from catering managers and prisoners, as well as repeated requests for things, i.e. on a catalogue request, we'll look at that, and if we get in a food item that's being requested regularly, we'll look to factor that into the catalogue and replace items that are really low volume. We've also got a recipe file of about 1,100 recipes they want to use, and we've got standard menus as well available on our portal that have been nutritionally analysed. But one thing I want to make clear is in most cases, for most things, it's generally up to the establishment what they put on their menu, as long as they abide by the policy. We don't prescribe menus to them. We don't have mandatory menus, is probably a better way of putting it. However, I will mention that we have a new policy that's almost ready for publication that I'm keen to be able to share with everyone, that I think will cover a lot of the things that have been discussed on this call, and a lot of the other things that have been put in the chat. What I can say is that the policy was this policy that I worked on involved engaging with lots of external agencies, nutritional academics, the Office of Health Improvement and Disparities, the NHS, Department of Health and Social Care. We included the Women's Estate within that, who had early sight of the policy and taken on board all their comments. I'll probably get the wording wrong, but it's Prison Midwives, I think. There was a group called Prison Midwives that I was put in touch with. They influenced the policy. The Vegan Society have been involved. Basically, everyone I could think of that was going to be useful to making sure the policy met the needs, which is what we've tried to do in terms of nutrition. And finally, there's a lot more must-dos in this policy, as opposed to the previous one or the current policy, where there are a lot of recommendations given to establishments where we felt we could and it was necessary. We've changed those to must-dos, so just have to watch this space, and very keen to see it, Victoria, but and colleagues. But hopefully we'll be able to share it pretty soon, and I think it'll be positively welcomed. I have been making notes while we've been doing this to see if there's anything that I can look to factor in to the policy that's not in there.
Well, we're
but yeah,
always
so
happy to come back to Al on that if that's useful to you. But yeah, we're very much looking forward to seeing that.
So yeah, hopefully we'll be able to share it soon. I mean, I'll just tell you the key bit that I've made notes on is, I think it was Maria that was talking about cultural participate, allowing prisoners to participate in preparing dishes. That's something that I always did when I was a catering manager. However, it may be something that we can put into the policy as a recommendation that people look at doing that, for all cultural festivals, as like the ones you suggested, not just Black History Month and Ramadan, but Diwali, Chinese New Year, and any other specific cultural events. So I look to having a look at that, and we've already referenced the Eat Well guide, but the note you put in, I've made a note, Victoria, to have a look at the vegan Eat Well guide. Pretty sure that we don't reference that, so I'll look to see where we can get that put in as well. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, happy for you to come back to Helen or Freya, nutritionists, on that, if that's helpful.
I mean, I've got a big group of nutritionists involved, and the Vegan Society, their nutritionist has been involved, but I don't think the Vegan Eat Well guide has been mentioned, so I'll have a look at that.
Thank you, Al. I'm just wondering whether we should just stop sharing the screen and open up, because there seems to be questions in the chat, in the Q&A, and people with their hands up. So I just want to make sure that we try and capture everyone. So I can see a hand up. I'm sorry, all I can see. Oh, Caroline, do you want to come in?
Hold on a second. I'll just
Just
that
let,
as well.
let everyone unmute.
I don't think I
everyone.
have the option to do it all as a group, unfortunately, so I'll have to do it. Yeah.
Hello, can you
Team
hear
is
me?
failing again. Hi, yes.
Hi, so I work as allied health professional lead within the South Eastern Trust for the prisons in Northern Ireland. I just had an interesting question, just back to, because I understand that HMP Drake is young offenders and female, and we have a prison, quite a small estate, with about 172 male young offenders, female young offenders and females, and we've a real difficulty. We've changed the menus on the other two sites, but just looking at the menu choices that would cover one sort of catering department to cater for all of those choices, and just wondering, Jamie, do you have separate menu choices for females and the young offenders, or have you joined it all up?
We only run one menu here. But to be fair, our young offender population is very small. We're only talking single figures at the minute.
Thank you. Yeah, no, that's really helpful. And probably also, the last meeting we had with the governor there was, you were saying about the funding of sort of £3.1p, but we have an increased population from what the funding was. So we have funding for 140, and we currently have a population of 172. Does that happen across? Is there additional funding that's allocated to you, or are you the funding for the year?
That funding would be per person per day. So if your population rises, then you should be able to claim that money.
Yeah, no, that's okay. That's great.
That
Thanks
would
for your
be
help.
Between your governor and your finance department, to be honest.
Yeah. Thank you.
Victoria's dropped off at the moment, but the other part of the first question, which was, I think, more directed to Maria and Erin, was, were prison regimes open to making changes to the way you did things in response to the findings?
Yeah, so we're actually at that point now, and what I will say is all of the prison governors that gave us access to the prisons were very supportive and very open-minded about the work that we've been doing. But we're at the point where we are working with them to look at ways we can go forward. So, for example, one of the prisons, we have got food behind bars to pilot a program that is based off our findings, and that includes not only eating together, but also trying to bring the families involved as well. So at the moment, Food Behind Pies is Food Behind Pies. Food Behind Bars is piloting this, and we should hopefully see some results at the end of February. We are also hosting an event in March, and the HMPPS or representatives from HMPPS will be there, so we'll be able to launch our toolkit and also speak about the kind of recommendations that we've bringing forward. So yeah.
Great, thank you. Helen, I see you've got your hand up as well.
Yeah, I just wanted to add a couple of things to in response to Emily's question as well. One was, in addition to the catalogue that the catering staff can order from, there's an increasing amount of food being grown within prisons, and I know that's a big push from HMPPS to grow more food, and there's the opportunity there for requests to be made. So I think, you know, there's going to be an increasing focus on the relationship between farms and gardens and catering, so that things can be grown and be requested by the kitchen and be grown there. Jamie might have something to say about that as well. But the other thing was just to say that within our courses, as we said, we encourage women to feel empowered. And there's an example of where one woman, she saw a recipe that we had using wholemeal pita bread, and it wasn't available on the canteen or in the kitchen, but she talked to the catering manager and they looked at the catalogue. It wasn't available on there, but they made a request for it. And so as a result of this woman making the request, the wholemeal pita bread appeared on the catalogue, so that it was available then for the kitchen and presumably for all kitchens as well.
So
have we got Victoria back, or
yes, sorry, I'm back. I'm sorry, I'm having such problems with my internet today. You'd have thought home working has still not resolved itself. There's a couple of questions in the Q&A. I think they mostly aimed at Jamie. I just had a follow up in terms of the price. Someone is kind of wanting clarification about how many meals you provide for £3.01, and it's 3 meals, right? And but my understanding is do you get more from in the youth offending for young people? Is that right?
All the budgets are set by the government. They were given autonomy a couple of years ago, so you will find that youth estate, as in dedicated youth centres, may increase their budget just to increase the calorific intake. Whereas, like I say, we've only got a very small young offender population, so we're just £3 a penny across the board, and from that we'll do breakfast, lunch, dinner, and supper.
Oh, okay. So someone else asked, what is the size of your kitchen team?
Staffing wise, there's 5 of us. So that includes myself, 2 deputies and 2 chefs. Okay,
and how many prisoners are working in the kitchen daily?
We have 10 to 15 women in the kitchen at any one time.
Okay.
I say we're feeding average 300 a day, twice a day.
Okay, and one other question that relates to that is about where, I think the person that's asking this question might have come in late, because asking where do people cook the communal, what's the communal cooking facilities for the Grace Bock, and I wondered whether it's the Grace Bock, can women opt out of having the 3 meals a day and have the money spending on the Grace Box, or how does the Grace Box work? Do they pay for that out?
The Grace Box is something that we will pass on to the house, so it's not an individual thing. It's a big shopping cart with these goods in, and it's for the house. So like I say, it's to encourage communal cooking. So on each house unit, they've got kitchenettes with ovens, stovetop, microwave, air fryers, and they'll utilise those. The idea is it's to offset some of the cost of potentially cooking for themselves. So, you know, if I can give them a load of onions to make a curry, that's something they haven't then got to buy off their canteen. They can then use that money to purchase something a bit more, maybe a protein item or something that they want.
And is
So
it
the idea is to complement what we do.
okay? And is that only available to enhanced prisoners or
Everybody.
anyone? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, I'll stop hogging the floor. Are there other questions, Chris, that I can't see? Sorry.
I'll just go through them. There's some in different chats, so I'm going to try and figure them out. We've got one from Rosie Meek. She says, as will come as no surprise to those who know me and my focus on sport and physical activity, I wonder if you see women who are engaging with the gym more receptive to learning about diet and nutrition. And then she says, see my review and recommendation 3 on nutrition from my sport and physical activity review. And she's put a link to that in the chat.
Great.
Thank
you.
I think that's, I don't know if it's directed at Jamie. That one, if you see.
Well, I mean, the only information I can put on that is we work with our gym staff, and they have health champions. So the health champions will have copies of our menus, and they will engage with the women and advise them what to eat, depending what their goals are. Obviously, if you're trying to get fit, you're going to need more calories. If you're trying to lose weight, you want less calories. So they'll utilise our menus to tailor the advice for the needs of the individual from that.
Great, thank you. There's a question that came in from someone who wasn't able to come to the session, but I'm just wondering whether I can ask this to Maria and Erin, because it seems like something that might have come up in the conversations that you had when you were doing your research. The question, well, it's a statement. For many, access to a good amount of fresh fruit and vegetables in prison means buying them on the canteen, i.e. the prison shop, thus forcing people to choose between their nutrition and having a call with their family, for example. Cost on canteen sheets are often high comparative to the cost of prisoner wages. Is that something that came up in your research? And whether, obviously, that's open to Jamie as well, and Helen and Freya.
The short answer is yes. It's something that came up quite a lot. And actually, as Maria said, we started our research. We started going into the prisons early-ish 2022. So lots of the women that we spoke to had come in during COVID when they'd been given an extra £10 credit. I can't remember off the top of my head if it was a week or a month, but £10 phone credit. To speak to their families because visits couldn't happen because of COVID. So they'd kind of worked out a bit of a balance of, well, I can afford this much on canteen from my wages and this much based on what my family send in, and I can have this many phone calls. And then obviously when that phone credit got taken away, that was quite destabilizing for lots of the women. But yeah, we've spoken in a couple of other events and conferences about how kind of the process of canteen really reproduces financial inequalities that women might have experienced on the outside, because people are reliant on kind of families to send money in order to be able to get what some women will call, a good diet in some of the prisons.
I would refute that from my position. I mean, our baseline is to provide a wholesome, nutritious menu. That is the bottom line. So if we're not doing that, then we're not fulfilling our job. The money is tight on that, but it is doable. I'm living proof that it's doable. You tend to find that the money that they spend on the canteen is more for luxury goods than offsetting normal menu. And again, a lot of it might be personal choice. So there might not be something on, because we've only got 5 choices a day. They might not like something on that day, so they may choose to offset it with something they've got off the canteen. But generally, if they choose off the menu, they will be getting what they need: calorific intake, nutritional intake. But food is very, very personal and emotive.
Yeah, it is. It is very personal. I think that's, one of the things that we found. And I think we definitely saw examples where women did feel like their food needs were being met. And it varied across the prisons. Obviously, I'm sure, as you'll know, based on a number of things. But I think one of the things that kind of came up a lot for the women who didn't feel like their needs were being met were not less about the kind of calorific and nutritional, well, maybe a bit about the nutritional, but more about kind of the quality and things like that, is what a lot of the women that were dissatisfied in some of the prisons felt. And those women would, if possible, be on canteen only diets because they can buy wraps and tins of fish and all these sort of things. So yeah, I think that there's lots of factors that play, but I know from the women we spoke to, not all of them felt like all their needs were being met.
I think there is some issue. Like I say, my background 20 odd years ago was fine dining, so I've got an eye on what it looks like, not necessarily what it just tastes like. The first taste is with the eye. So like I said, luckily we've got a central servery, so we can present the food to make it look a bit more appetizing. But if you are wing fed, it goes in a hot trolley out to a wing. It's beyond the chef's control then.
I think that's a huge issue. I think that's a really big issue.
Then is being served and presented by people that aren't necessarily catering background, and it's a case of get it out, get them back behind the doors.
And I do think there are some really great examples. Obviously, like yourself, Jane, you've done some really good work. But when it came to this research, it is important to kind of highlight some of the kind of issues around kind of canteen. And one of the big things was the exacerbation in terms of financial inequalities, and many women felt that. But we, like I said before, we do have a paper around kind of staff perceptions, and they were off of some of the things that you have said. But in contrast to that, the value of how women felt when it came to the role of food was quite significant when it came to the canteen.
Can I just come in? I'm just conscious with the last few minutes, but I think what we wanted to highlight is that there are pockets of really great things happening. I think what the work that we're trying to do over these series of webinars is to think about how do we make those things that are happening in prisons where things are going really well and you're doing great things, how does that become part of the strategic oversight of all prisons? And it's not just people like you, Jamie, that are doing really great things, that happens everywhere. I'll come to you in a second, Helen. I just wanted to, there was just a comment from someone in the chat talking about their own direct experience at HMP Style, that they found access to fresh fruit and veg was close to nil, inclusive of the prison menu choices, which were predominantly frozen or tinned. It was inconsistent in terms of access via canteen sheets, but I praise Jamie for his work and dedication to the good practice and nutritional efforts. So I think that's the point. It's like, yeah, there are some really amazing things happening, but it's how do we make, what needs to happen, what needs to change to make that embedded, and that any place you go, you find the same. Helen, I just wanted to bring you in because I've just seen you've had your hand up for a while.
Yeah, I just wanted to say a couple of things relating to that. One is Al Kriski's left, so he can't say, but the work he's doing, I think, is going to go a long way to ensuring that meals are nutritionally balanced. The other thing I want to say was there's been some recent work, a paper published by Jonathan Tamam. I don't know if he's here. It was of a YOI, it was of a male YOI, but it did show generally the menus were nutritionally balanced, and the things they tended to be higher in salt and saturated fats and calories than they should have been, but the nutrients were okay, apart from things that quite often are not in high enough amounts generally in the community anyway. So that was vitamin D and selenium. And my final point quickly was that when we did some work at Wandsworth, it was a men's prison, but we looked at fruit and veg within the menus. And interestingly, there was enough, every menu met 5 a day, apart from the halal menu. and people just following a halal menu couldn't get 5 a day from that, and they would have to go to the canteen.
Really quickly to Jamie's point around, you know, the food being served off the wings, I think that's really important in terms of, you know, quality, because actually what we heard a lot of as well that was that by the time people got it, it was cold or congealed. And I think, you know, even if food is nutritionally balanced, if it doesn't, as Jamie said, look good, if it doesn't taste good, if it's cold when it should be hot or the other way around, it's quite unappetizing. And as a lot of the women in our study experience, quite dehumanizing to not be fed something.
Yeah,
It's like what you would expect spaghetti bolognese or the like to taste. So I think someone in the chat said something about infrastructure, and that's a really important point when we are trying to, you know, think about best practice.
That's always going to be a stumbling block because every establishment is different.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But I mean, that chimes with our experiences of it, you know, you've got to look at the whole food chain across the prisons. Why, you know, a lot of our work is around how do you look at the food system within a prison. So as you say, Jamie, if it leaves the kitchen, you've got no control. And you know, we've stood and watched, you know, prisoners serve out food, and they've got blue gloves on, and they're just taking handfuls of food and putting them on plates. So that's not appetizing at all. You know, there's always the issues around bullying again, you know, so there's so many different things to be thought about. And as you say, you know, once out of the control of the kitchen. So why taking that's why taking a sort of systems approach seems like the most sensible way forward. And just the last couple of minutes. Sorry, go ahead.
I spoke at the end of my presentation about education, and I was talking education around the women being able to choose their foods, but there's probably an element of education on, you know, the social and the mental impacts of how that food's delivered, whether it's the person serving it or how it's going out, you know, visual impact of food. So there's probably a learning curve there for staff and prisoners alike.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just there's a couple of points put in the chat by Gillian Sutcliffe. I wondered if you wanted to come in, because I wasn't quite sure about your question about the canteen sheets not being resolvable. I wondered if you wanted to make that point, or if not, don't worry, we can pretty much close to the end. I don't know if you wanted to come in there, Gillian. Oh, you can't. Okay.
I'm just I'll just try and get sorry. I'm trying to find. Okay, I've allowed the mic for Gillian if she wants to come in.
Hi, I'm sorry. Having technical problems today.
That's okay. No, that's absolutely fine. These things happen. This is a subject that's very close to my heart. So none of the points I've made are intended to be critical or anything at all. It's more kind of things that are in my mind. I'm a psychologist working across the women's group, and we've done some work exploring this, and I've spoke to different people on this call at various different points. I think one of my points was about canteen sheets, and I believe one of the key issues around that is contract, and I think every which way many people have tried to resolve that. So, you know, if you can, if you're able to do that, then, you know, it's time to retire. So good luck to you with that. So the other thing, then the other part I also put was about the infrastructure, and we've had various conversations about how to resolve, you know, or make inroads with things that could be done as opposed to the things that can't be done, you know, in terms of how food is presented, how people can get the food to places warmer, etc. But then you've also got lots of issues about regime and staffing, and, you know, so kind of all the other HMPPS issues that can go around these issues. But then my other question was about how the attitudes towards food kind of from the community currently map onto people in prisons' attitude towards food, because, you know, in the community we've seen like a massive increase in processed food and people accessing processed food, and more people moving away from cooking in the community, as far as I'm aware. So I'm thinking that if people have kind of been brought up in that way and that has been the norm for them, how difficult it is to change that mindset, because we're almost like starting from scratch or having to go back in. And like Jamie said, I 100% believe in, you know, psychoeducation for people around food, but that part in itself is absolutely huge, because if people haven't been exposed to that type of lifestyle and fresh cooking and knowing how to make a dish or serve a dish, etc., it'll be incredibly challenging. So I just wondered if some of the attitudes might just simply map onto what we experience in the community, and that is kind of a societal issue as opposed to purely just a prison-based issue, and then how we go about resolving that. Because I guess if you were to ask many people in the community, you know, what should the nutritional what should food include from a nutritional value from a women's perspective, particularly if you're a woman going through the menopause or a woman who's pregnant, I think most people wouldn't know. So we're starting from, you know, a very challenging position at the minute, I think, as a society, not just as a prison. And then the other thing is if with women serving relatively short sentences, I mean, the maximum sentence currently is around about 9 weeks for most women. We're trying to have it's a very steep climb over a very short period of time.
Yes, absolutely massive points you put across. We're at the very end of the webinar. I just wonder if anyone wants to come back in quickly on that, because there's lots of topics and there's lots. I mean, we could have another whole webinar based on this another hour.
Thank you, Gillian. That's a really, really important part. And actually, a lot of our interviews that we did, we really touched upon what happened before prison with the women with women, and spoke about their experiences when it came to their understanding of food, but also the social role of food. So not only was it about, you know, their experiences of like quality of food and healthy food, but also, you know, eating together and the family time. And that really had a huge impact or influence on how they saw food in prison. So we would argue this is not just an institutional issue when it comes to understanding food from a women's point of view. It does go back to what's going on within the community. And I would like to add also, you know, even though there were a lot of women that did have a lot of kind of chaotic and negative experiences of food in prison, we did find that quite a lot of women wanted to kind of improve their understanding about food. So just off the back of Jamie's last point, food education came up quite a bit in terms of wanting more of that, and wanting to be able to understand, you know, the kind of what does healthy food mean. Would you say anything else to add to that, Erin?
No, absolutely not. I think obviously, I mean, Victoria mentioned this at the very, very start of the webinar, you know, the women in prisons demographics and life experiences don't necessarily directly map on to the average general population, but I would say, you know, where they did tend to map on to attitudes towards food outside. Yeah, I would absolutely agree.
Jamie, Freya, Helen, any last words?
Can I add something to that? I just wanted to say, as a nutritionist that works in the community and in a prison setting, I can, you know, I completely see that reduction in kind of cooking from fresh foods and that reduction in knowledge. But I think that is something alongside more formalized kind of food education kind of sessions that Jamie suggested, actually having those kind of facilitated cooking sessions where not only are you kind of providing a space for cooking education, recipe alterations, budgeting, and all the other kind of social aspects, the benefits that come with it, you are also empowering the people who do still have those skills to kind of recognize that actually those skills are really, really valuable. And then you're creating a kind of peer learning environment, which I think is really important. So I think that, alongside some of the more kind of formal education that Jamie has mentioned, is important.
It's almost old school skills that are sort of going by the wayside.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think, you know, your point, Gillian is accurate. The inequalities that are and then the kind of changes in diet are mirrored, accentuated in prison, because the majority of women that are in prisons are more marginalised and have a greater range of issues. But I just wondered if, Helen, do you have anything last you want to say before I wrap up in response to that? Or
just generally, I just want to say, actually, I think there are some quite exciting things going on in prisons around food now. And from what we've heard from HMPPS head office, they are listening, and I think we hopefully will see changes for the better. And I think it's really important that we hear people that come to these webinars and have an interest in prison food, that we keep the momentum going and keep the pressure on as well. So that's voluntary sector and academics and people within the prison service.
absolutely. Well, I'm sorry we've run over, but it just shows you how many people are interested in this topic and how important it is. So I just want to thank all our speakers. I really appreciate your time and your expertise.